Hey everyone, welcome to another On This Day in Canadian Military History live stream. Normandy month continues. This time we're going up in the air, pretty much for the whole thing. We're going to be looking at Bomber Command and its overall role in Overlord. Again, it was hard to put this on social media, especially Twitter, because of the text limitations. I kept saying, in Overlord, but it's adjacent to Overlord, supporting Overlord, after, before. Anyway, we'll get into it. It'll make more sense once we get into it. So I'm really looking forward to this one, as I keep saying. I've been trying to get today's guest, James Jefferies, on for a long time. It's just I haven't been able to reach out to him, but it finally worked. We got a way to get him in, and hopefully we'll have him back. Put him on the spot already. But because of the slides and everything he's done in the past, he's made that reputation for himself, so it's his own fault. So anyway, we'll just get started, and we'll get into it. And I think today it's going to be best if we just have questions all the time like normal. Me and James were chatting about that. So if you guys will have questions and comments or whatever, we'll jump in, because we're figuratively all over the map in a lot of ways in the timeline. So it'll be good just to fire away if you like. So thanks, James. Thanks for coming on again. How's it going today?
My pleasure. Yeah, absolutely good. I say it's been a little bit warmer here in England, but when we say warm here, it's absolutely nothing. Tiniest bit of sun, and we're running for the sun cream.
Yeah, you guys are going to catch on fire, I guess. But here and now, you guys got pretty warm. And I was telling you, actually, we're really warm in Ottawa, which is quite rare. I mean, it's getting more and more common, unfortunately. But we're under a thunder or tornado warning. So if I have to run away in the middle of this, that's why. But we should be okay. It's very unlikely to happen. But just as a heads up, if I run, that's why. But everything's looking good so far. I think the sun's back out, so we should be okay. So, like I said, thanks for coming on. And as I always like to start these, I know we've talked many times just on Twitter and whatever. Never done this, but we've talked and about Canada and your interest in aviation, and maybe you can get into that. But why? And like I said, I like to ask this topic. Why Bomber Command specifically? It's got its controversies, it's got its complexities, it's got a lot going on. So what, do you have a story of like, I'll study the big heavies here. Like, how'd you get here?
I got here really. I'm going to go with how I got into history, which was when I was very, very young. I watched the film Battle of Britain, which watched it. Absolutely fascinated. I fell in love with the Spitfire. I wanted to be a Spitfire pilot growing up.
Yeah.
But as I wanted to read more, I watched more films. There was this story of this need to what happened next. It's very well saying that it ends in like this. The invasion is cancelled, etc., etc. That the film suggests and everything. But what happens next? And I suppose loosely tied to that is the fact that you've got the bomber offensive, which starts up. And I remember reading books and watching a few documentaries and going, this is a really incredible, powerful story. And like you say, it's full of controversy. There's arguments that are still being had to this day. And it's one of those ones that you dive deeper and deeper in, and you just find it fascinating, which eventually led to my MA dissertation, which was looking at the role of Bomber Command in the Battle of Britain.
Right.
Again, kind of like a story that I'm more than happy to share. It's a story that's been forgotten, I say, in the speech brackets, because that's phrases used so far too often. But yeah, it's finding these stories and just being absolutely fascinated by it. And this is all part of it. This is all part of understanding that story. And that again has led to what I'm doing now, my PhD, looking at the history of the war in the air and looking at the cultural memory in Britain and why certain things are remembered and why other things are omitted. This new sense of different senses of identity and masculinity and such like, and sense of being, Britishness and such like. And all of these things fit into it. And I just find it absolutely fascinating, the part that the air war plays in both world wars.
Right. Yeah. And I just want to say this before I forget, because I'm going to keep pushing James, because I know he does great work. He's been on World War II TV, again, another supporter of my channel and my work. What, 3 times? 4?
3 times now, yeah.
I've linked them all down below, because you're mentioning Bomber Command and Battle of Britain. That was a really good one when Woody did the Battle of Britain week, I believe it was.
Yes, yeah.
And check that out after, not now. stay with us. But yeah, that was a really good one because again, like you said, it's building off kind of what I was mentioning, the complexity and the what next. And to me, that's always interesting. It's a really story that I'll admit, particularly what we're looking at today, not as much as I'd like to know. So again, I'm excited to learn from you because again, the slides, I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. Oh, I want to learn about that. Like, oh, I need to know more about that one, or like things like Crossbow. Like I've looked at it, but I've scratched the surface of the surface, right? So I'm excited to kind of to dig on that. So if we'll pull up the slide deck that you put together.
Yeah. So yeah, this is really just an introductory slide saying that I'm James Jefferies. I'm at the University of Essex looking at the war in the air. And today really I'm focusing more on the heavy bombers. This isn't going to be about the Typhoons and the medium bombers so much, although they will get a mention. This is about the heavy 4-engine bombers, like the amazing painting that I found online of Halifax is there supporting the invasion.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's incredible. I don't know who did it actually. I found it and then
really? Okay.
Closed the page and put it up. So if anybody knows, that would be
yeah. If anybody knows, leave a comment either now on the side, but if you're watching later, especially down below, that will help because again, I don't know either because I'm not sure, but it's a good one. Yeah, there's so many. Sorry, there's just so many out there, right? They're amazing, and it's hard to find who did them. Yeah,
I've got a bit of a soft spot for the Halifax as well. It does get kind of overshadowed by the Lancaster, which was an incredible aircraft, but the Halifax is kind of like
Yeah, it's got its fans. I mean, you're not alone. So not my favorite, but what can you do?
Well, I mentioned the Bristol Blenheim, but if Phil Blood's watching, he'll tell me
he's
mentioning that.
He will, so I'm sure he'll enjoy
he's going to tell me after. But yeah, if we go to the next slide, and I'm going to rewind a fair bit and talk about the point blank directive. So January 43, Casablanca, there's an agreement for a combined bomber offensive. So you've got the United States Army Air Force, you've got the Royal Air Force bomber commands, and they are going to work together. And there is eventually this idea of them bombing around the clock, so to speak. So you've got the United States Army Air Force by day, bomber command at night. Bomber commands, they've now generally built tonight. They've tried daylight raids and they hit very heavy losses. The accuracy isn't there. They move tonight, and there's been this long development, which I won't go into now, but that's why they're bombing at night. And the Americans come in, they've built for day, they come in. And yeah, initially, actually, it doesn't go well, to be honest. The first couple of raids are fine, when they're raiding the ports in France, but when you get the raids sort of like deeper into Germany, they're disasters, essentially. But I will go a little bit more into that later. So 14th of June 1943, there is this order to bomb specific targets such as aircraft factories. The main priority is let's destroy the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. Let's get them out of the way, have the skies clear for an invasion and a seaborne landing. At the moment, it's scheduled for May 1944, but of course, eventually it does move to June 6th. Spoilers. But it does hit a bit of a snag, which I'll talk about in a minute. But you can see there that eventually there are Allied forces in Italy, so that there are bombers that can reach virtually everywhere under the Axis. Yeah, is within the range of heavy bombers. So this is a huge moment, really. What we're going to do with the strategic bomber force, etc. What we're going to do with it in terms of supporting the second front. Now, if you just go to the next slide, I want to talk about some of the personalities that we've got here. So on the left, you've got Tedder. Now, he is deputy to Eisenhower. Yeah, shrewd guy, good diplomat, calm, good people person from the accounts I've read, from what I can gather. And as I say, he's Eisenhower's deputy. He's there. I read in one of the official histories that he was picked as well because he was RAF, the importance of the air war and having a British representative, but I don't know how true that is. It makes sense, certainly. You've then got in the middle, Lee Mallory, who, yeah.
Everyone's favorite, right?
Everyone's favorite, yeah.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
I can even mention his name in the slightest adjacent context to anything on social media, and I'm just like, I hate him. Sorry.
Yeah. This is
something
where we
that
get
just
a load of
happened.
groans in the comments as well.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, just, you want to start a fight, just put his name, and that's all you got to do.
Yeah. Now, for those who don't know, he was in charge of one of the groups in the Battle of Britain. He later became head of fighter command. He was quite instrumental in getting rid of Hugh Dowding, who was leading fighter commander in the Battle of Britain. Very controversy over this idea of the big wing having these mass fighter formations, and it's just a whole, gosh, that's a talk in its own, isn't it?
Yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, a controversial figure, one that puts his nose into things, etc. At the moment, he's given command of the Allied air operations.
Yeah.
But rather interesting enough, he is not in charge of the strategic bomber forces. They are still going to be controlled by Sparks and Harris, who we'll introduce in a minute. The final figure, because these are figures I'm going to mention, is Chief of the Air Staff, Charles Portal. Now, he is, effectively pretty much the biggest cheese there in the Royal Air Force, to use a technical term there. And he was head of Bomber Command during the Battle of Britain, well respected, and definitely has the ear of Harris and the Prime Minister, etc. Very, very key, important figure that we will mention, or I will mention, a few times during this. So there are three personalities I wanted to introduce first for those who might not know them. And if we just go to the next slide, we have two more. On the left, we have Tui Spatz, who is head of the American United States Army Air Force Heavy Bomber Force, the 4-engine Heavy Bomber Force. So you think about the B-17s and Liberators, etc. Now, he is not keen on the second front, to put it lightly. He thinks it's a stupid idea. He thinks that the way to destroy Nazi Germany, bring it to surrender, is to destroy the oil. Get rid of the oil, tanks, aircraft, etc., won't be able to move. They won't be able to wage war. And I mean, to be fair, there's an element of truth in that. This goes back to a pre-war sort of interwar idea of, as Stanley Baldwin said, the bomber will always get through. You won't need ground forces. The bombers will just smash everything to bits, and there's no need for fighting. And it appeals to politicians and air-minded people, as so to speak, because it's cheap, it's effective. You're going to avoid the trenches and slaughter the First World War. This is the theory. And it's of that school. It's a continuation of the school and idea. So we've got him, and to the right, someone that I'm going to mention a lot, Arthur Harris. Arthur Harris, Bomber Harris, Butcher Harris, whatever you want to call him. He's got numerous names. He's head of RAF Bomber Command. Now, he has been head since February 1942, and before then, Bomber Command had gone through various moments of crisis, I suppose, really, where this promise of being a force that could bring Germany to its knees, it just hasn't happened. And he comes in, he really gets the force together. He creates huge raids on German cities. So you've got raid on Lubeck, you've got 1,000 bomber raid on Cologne, 1942. Now, 1,000 bombers then is absolutely bonkers. It's just not heard of. Raids are usually a max couple of hundred, few hundred. So he's absolutely, and this is for the newspapers to say, look, Britain's hitting back. It's 1942, the Axis, it's generally things are in their favor at the moment, and it's a very uncertain period. So he's about creating these news headlines, etc., etc. And he doesn't like the idea of the second front. So you got both of the strategic bomber commanders going, this is pointless. The bombers can do it. Come on, we don't need troops on the ground. The bombers can do this. And Harris, his belief is in bombing cities. So you get this concept of area bombing that comes through. Bomber Command is found wanting in terms of precision targets. And there is this report in the middle of 1941 called the Butt Report, which is made, that suggests that Bomber Command is not hitting its targets. It's an absolute knock in the face. And so this theory really of, well, if you hit a city and there's a few factories in it, that's great. And you kind of carpet bomb this whole area rather than try and aim for the city and you're going to miss. That's really, really basically boiling it down to its nuts and bolts. So that's one of the major reasons why he believes in this.
Sorry, before we go on, this is a really good question. I don't know, honestly. I have no idea from Norma, great supporter of the channel, about Spatz and Harris. Did they get along? I've never even thought about that, to be honest. It's a good question.
They did. From all accounts I can get, they did get along, except they differed over the fact that one was oil and one was attacking, especially Berlin. Harris has got, which we'll talk about in a little bit, of Battle of Berlin leading up to this, really about attacking the German capital. And there you go. The infrastructure's gone. Nazi Germany is finished. You know, war's over. So they do get on, by all accounts, except they on the finer things. So there is this disagreement in the sense of direction and such like. But if we go to the next slide, this is quite a build up, I realized, to Normandy, but it is very, very important.
We'll get there.
We will get there. So Harris, as I say, is really against the land invasion. He says, you know, that the headlines are going to be dead Marines, are going to be dead troops on the beaches. It's just not going to work. Give me the bomber force. I can do it. And he writes a letter to Portal, Lee Mallory, and Montgomery, General Montgomery, in January 1944, saying, and I quote, "Our best weapon," unquote, "is only suitable for bombing Germany and industrial areas by night." So there's already this plan. No. You need to attack troop concentrations. You need to attack lines of communication, railways. And Harris is there going, "My force can't do it. They're not built for that. Let them bomb the cities. Let them bomb Berlin." So at the middle of at this time, you've got the battle, what's called the Battle of Berlin. It's not to be confused with the one later on in the war. And he says, quote, that his force was not equipped, unquote, for this act of supporting the ground forces as well. And it would be, quote, a disservice, unquote, to them. And it even says that it would lead to disaster. You use this force in this sense, it will lead to disaster. Which, I mean, what do you say about this? Because there's a part of looking at this and you can say, well, yeah, there have been precision attempts. You've got famously the Dam Busters raid. You've got other attempts, but then you've got others that have been complete disasters when you've used heavy bombers. You've got ones like the Augsburg raid, but nothing was done at all. And it is built for this nighttime city raids. And you think this is January and they're looking at May to turn around a force in that time. You can go, okay, I can kind of see where Harris is coming from. Yeah. At the same time, you're going, wow, you don't have much faith in your infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's sorry. This is my non Air Force expert opinion, but it seems to me, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Harris, in that sense, right, you know, making it seem like, oh, my force can't do this, is because his ultimate objective is always his ultimate objective, right? He has the idea of hitting the cities, hitting the industrial centers, above all else, like you've already kind of mentioned. I mean, I could be. And any excuse will do almost at that point. Yeah, we suck at this, so we can get back to doing this. You know, that's just my sense anyway.
But yeah, and I mean, you look at it. You look at what's happened in 1943. You've had the bombing of Hamburg, firebombing of Hamburg, which has been horrific, absolutely horrific. Firebombing, firestorm is created. You've had the battle of what's dubbed the Battle of the. Everything was a battle to Harris. If he was, you know, so it was the Battle of. Yep. And he would say that his aircrew were going into battle. They weren't going on ops or doing missions. They were going into battle. Mm-hmm. You have the Battle of the Ruhr, which again includes the Dam Busters raids, include heavy bombing of the industry there, and I think is fairly successful, and especially this progression of where bomber commanders come from. It's really quite astonishing what they're able to achieve. Mm-hmm. You then look at that and look at what's happened before with precision attacks. As I say, you can see where this argument is going. You absolutely totally can. Not saying that I agree with it, but you can see the argument here. Right. But yeah, and if we go to the next slide, we'll look. I promise we will get that. We will get that. This is very important. So this is Harris going, okay, let's use the bomber force to try and make Nazi Germany surrender. This is the Battle of Berlin. So this starts in autumn 1943. It's mainly launched at the capital, but it's also targeting other major cities that are linked to the Nazi Party but it's not going well. It doesn't start well, and it finishes a complete disaster. The capital, for starters, is almost at the limit of the heavy bombers' range. Mm-hmm. And I think it's about 8 or 9 hours to fly there. You need that darkness for protection. So there's only a limited part of the year where you're going to be able to fly over. Mm-hmm. Unlike places like Hamburg, it's concrete, it's got wider roads, it's not going to create a firestorm, and it's well defended. It's the capital, and you've got an image there on the left of these huge flat towers that had air raid shelters underneath. I mean, they're still, they're still standing after
They're
loads
still
of
there.
bombing. And,
I mean, again, this is not
and Russian attacks and such like they're still there. They are,
they've tried to take them down and they can't. They're too well built and so it's too expensive and too difficult. Again, I can't remember where that was. It might have been one of the ones in Hamburg. I can't remember exactly. They tried to take it down. It was too expensive and they went, whatever. Just leave it. And they've turned it into other things. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, this is what they're meeting in Berlin. So it's not going their way. On top of this, the German night defenses are improving immensely. You have new tactics, you have new radar systems, you have this thing called Schräge Musik, which is slanted music, which is also known as jazz music. So the slanted music was a derogatory term for jazz music. That's where we get it. Where the German fighters would fly underneath the bombers and have two guns firing up, radar guided, fire up, aim at the fuel tank. And it's good night Vienna for that bomber. And for a long time, the RAF don't realize what's happening. These bombers are going missing. Of course, the crews aren't coming back, so they're not saying, "Oh, we got attacked from underneath," because it's just So that's one of some of the tactics that are coming in. And as I say, that the capital's showing resistance. Harris is still adamant. He's still wanting this to be the moment that wins the war, and he actually boasts. I can't remember the exact quote, but he says that the war will be over by April 1944. It's estimated, and he says that it will cost the RAF, I can't remember, 700 aircraft or something like that, but it will cost Germany the war. He's very, very wrong. Very, very wrong. By March, 626 heavy bombers have been lost. 2,690 aircrew have been killed. 987 POWs in the Battle of Berlin. Roughly 30% of Berlin is destroyed. Around 4,000 German civilians killed. But there's the Nazi hierarchy hasn't been scratched by this. The Berliners are suffering. It's not ending the war at all. The losses are absolutely bonkers and totally unsustainable. And if we go to the next slide, the climax of this moment.
Yeah. Sorry, can I ask a question?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
This is completely my own question that it's not even really related to what we're talking about. I think we've discussed this before, but I don't know if the video's still up on the channel. I can't remember because I had to do kind of a cleansing a while back. Anyway, one of the wartime newsreels mentions, like, as you mentioned, talking about the shooting straight up and destroying. Basically takes the bomber right out. The Scarecrow, right? This supposed weapon. Is there any evidence that was ever actually used or that it even existed?
No. That's the new flak, isn't it?
I suppose it's new flak shell.
Yeah.
I don't even know what they think it is, to be honest.
The theory that I've heard is it's actually the bombers blowing up in the air for no reason, and they think it's a huge giant flak thing. But
the only reason I asked is because that's what that film literally describes it as. It looked like a bomber going off. I went, Occam's razor is not going to come into this one here. We're going to think they developed a whole new weapon that looks like that when it happened. I mean, sorry, this is a complete aside, but
no.
Stuff very often with air power people. So
I mean, it pretty much is that. And you do have some. I think the Mark III Lancaster had a ventral turret, and I think some of the Halifaxes did, but they were taken out to save weight to have more bombs. They were seen as useless. Which, looking at it, you just go, "Wow."
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
How many? But
that's a complete aside. We'll keep going. I just didn't have a chance to talk to you about this in person.
No.
The person we're gonna get right now. Right? Because it comes up time and time again, right? And as soon as I hear Battle of Berlin, when I'm not talking 45, that's what I'm thinking of. Right?
Yeah.
The losses.
And the other thing is you have these onboard radar systems to detect the enemy fighters, and it's actually used by the fighters to find the bombers.
Yes.
So they're absolutely in the dark, and I mean G as well. That's been hacked by the Germans fairly swiftly, so they're able to switch on the G set to find out where you are, and they go, "Oh, there's a bomber flying up there. It's just appeared." So there's not a lot going for them, and this period is just the costliest for Bomber Command. But if we go to the next slide, this is the pinnacle of this period. There's a raid on Nuremberg, 31st of March, 1944. Where 96 bombers are lost. It's still the bloodiest day in the Royal Air Force, bloodiest night. A dozen more crash or are written off on their return. So it's over 100 aircraft. It's a 13.6% loss rate, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, do I dub it the Air Force equivalent of the Battle of the Somme, 1st of July, in terms of impact? Yeah, it probably is up there, in all honesty. 82 of these 96 are shot down before even reaching Nuremberg. So they're hoping to go in with cloud cover, but the weather changes. There are warnings about this, but they're ignored. The bombers come through and they're in bright moonlight, and they're at a height where their contrails come along. So there's almost like this white sort of, I don't want to say smoke, but I can't think of the word, but just this line following the bombers. You see them in jets when they fly over. Which is just pointing them out. And yeah, the night fighters and defenses have an absolute field day. As I say, 82 are shot down before Nuremberg over the course of 90 minutes. It's about a bomber a minute that's being shot down and blown out of the sky. And you have people there. So you've got Reg Payne here, the quote, "I could see aircraft being shot down all around us. We could even see the aircraft registration letters. It was so clear." And this is what I mean by, it's just, and this is the pinnacle of it all absolutely going wrong for Bomber Command. The text on the side of the Germans, the circumstances. You've had the heavy losses with the Battle of Berlin. And I should add, the stat that I always find absolutely quite sobering is 537 aircrew are lost, RAF Bomber Command, which is more than RAF Fighter Command lost during the whole of the Battle of Britain.
Right. I
mean, let that soak in. The Battle of Britain that lasted officially from July to October 1940. That's, and most of them in the space of about an hour and a half. It's just gives you a sense of this. And it's an impact on Bomber Command. And it's saying these night attacks aren't working, and Nazi Germany is far from on its knees, so to speak.
So
if we go to the next slide, we've had the American Air Force come in, and initially it's been a disaster. Likewise, there have been incredibly heavy losses, but things start to change, and this is Operation Argument. It's known also as Big Week. Operation Argument covers a slightly longer period. Big Week is kind of when it really is the crunch point. It's largely an American operation, and the bombers are targeting generally targets linked to aircraft factories, to the Luftwaffe. It's all part of the point blank, which is why I mentioned at the beginning. It's all part of this knocking the Luftwaffe out of the air. You're thinking about a seaborne invasion and wanting clear skies. And as I say, the climax, known as Big Week, is between the 20th and 25th of February 1944. And to a degree, the bombers act as bait. You've got the new aircraft in the sense of the P-51 Mustang, which you've got in the top right corner there, which has the range that can go deep into Germany. It's got drop tanks. It can escort the bombers. And the fighter pilots are told, go after the fighters. Shoot down as many as you can. That is what don't worry about keep flying back and checking the bombers are okay. Go for it. And actually, with this, the bombers do pretty well. About 70% of the factories are destroyed that are linked to the Luftwaffe industry. But what is absolutely mind-blowing is 2,605 Luftwaffe aircraft are destroyed in February 1944.
Right.
Which is just, wow. Incredible.
That's a lot.
You think about these figures and the numbers of aircraft that air forces have. It's massive. It's absolutely huge. And with this, they're losing experienced Luftwaffe fighter pilots. They're going into ever shrinking numbers. And what's making it even harder for the Luftwaffe is they can't train the pilots quick enough. And the Allies, to their advantages, they can train their pilots in Canada, they can train their pilots in South Africa and America, free from combat. They can take their time, they can get used. And the Luftwaffe pilots don't have this luxury, and they're having to rush pilots because of the numbers they've lost over the course of the war, and they can't get them quick enough. So they've got less hours going in. So these new pilots are getting less and less experience, where the American pilots, the RAF pilots, etc., they're coming in with much more hours experience. And this is absolutely key, and it's helping with the figures. And it's forcing the Luftwaffe now to protect Germany. and it's moving them away from northern France.
Yes.
You've got this, and you could argue actually that what happens with the Battle of Berlin inadvertently, not by intention, is I guess there is a tension there as well. Maybe not so much by Harris, but these fighters are being tied down defending Germany as well.
Yes.
So ever more numbers are going further to, and there is this policy, then people are screaming out, you've got to stop these bombers within Germany, so they've got to move, and there's public policy, there's political policy, etc.
Yeah.
So they're moving, and it's falling straight into the Allies' hands, really. And eventually, in the long term, Bomber Command, as you can probably guess, are going to move away from the night raids generally for this period.
Yeah.
The night fighters are having to be transferred to day fighting because the numbers are just dwindling so much. So they're really, really stretched at this point at Luftwaffe, not to mention issues with fuel and such like. Yeah. But yeah, if we go to the next slide, I've used a phrase on this slide.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
So some of you have heard of the phrase that was given rather mockingly to the Americans when they came over to Britain: oversexed, overpaid, and over here. Well, the Americans retorted by saying undersexed, underpaid, and under Eisenhower.
Yeah.
To the Brits. And this is essentially what happens to Bomber Command. The big thing that happens after Nuremberg is it's a clear sign that this isn't working, and it needs to switch to supporting the cross-channel invasion. Harris threatens to resign. He's for want of a phrase, throwing his toys out the pram.
Yeah,
he's promised this. He's got all the faith, and his force is being used for something that he said would lead to disaster. Mm-hmm. His words, disaster, if they're used in this capacity. He threatens to resign, but Portal intervenes. And butters up to Harris, and I can't remember the exact phrasing, but he's basically saying there's no one else for the job. We can't change commanders. I mean, that's the other thing. They can't really change commanders so close to, only a matter of a couple of months.
Well, I mean, it's so funny. Yeah, I forgot about that, that interaction. And it's so funny because it's criticized for stroking Harris's ego, but also what are you going to do? You throw in at the 11th hour. It doesn't really work. Sorry, before we go on, I don't want to miss Darren's question. We were having some tech difficulties, so we're a bit all over the place with the comments. But about the output of bombers. So did the British output of bombers built all sorts diminish in late 44, early 45, even with the big raids going on, with the top brass knowing the war was nearly won?
Yeah, the production was still rising. I think by 44, America's overtaken by a fair amount at this stage. But yeah, the numbers are absolutely rising, and there's plenty of air crew. But yeah, it's still the unwritten rule. If I say rule, the unwritten thing is that to sustain, it's about 5% losses. Anything above is really that can't be sustained for too long.
Right.
So to have something like Nuremberg, where it's 13.5 or whatever it is, and the Berlin raids are in the 10%, the 1 in 10, that's not sustainable. But there are bombers, there are crews coming in, but it is a kind of we can't keep this up for too much longer because of the turnaround and such like. Hopefully that answers that. Yeah, no,
I think that's right, because that fits with everything again that I know just broadly from historiography and looking at this, that the numbers support that as far as I know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always that image of them, right? Literally I think it was in the U.S. A war worker tells a story of they're making machine guns next to refrigerators. Yeah. We're getting there at this point, right? So the production is just crazy how fast it's going.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that's the thing that Germany doesn't have is there is this muscle of factories that is all over the globe, really. And Canada builds loads of the heavy bombers.
Yeah, I mean, we're tiny in comparison, but even that's still bigger.
Yeah,
than we can do.
The materials and everything, I should say. Yeah, in America as well. But yeah, that's that. But yeah, so you got this, and from April 1944, Bomber Command's directives would effectively come under the direction of Eisenhower, as I said. So yeah, that's a big change. But there's still Harris is still seeing CRF Bomber Command. It's just that the direction is Ike says you need to target French railways, and Harris goes, okay.
Yeah.
Rather grumbling under his
with an eye roll. Yeah.
Yeah, his breath. So Bomber Command are now fully going for Overlord, and we finally reached it. That's the end of my introduction. I hope it was all important.
Well, sorry, Alex Black, who from the Juno Beach Center and watches a lot of the stuff on here and has appeared on this channel multiple times. It's just he brought that up a long time ago. I just was waiting to get there, and I think that's a good place, right?
Yeah.
But again, I won't steal your thunder here. But
no, please do. It's really,
I just couldn't get that out of my head just because it's such the way it's made, right? It's you can't do it, but you can.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So if we go to the next slide, we finally got D-Day on the title. So there we go. So 17th of April 1944, Allied Supreme Headquarters state the primary mission of the heavy bombers is the destruction of the Luftwaffe. So it's a continuation of Point Blank. Yeah. Big Week has done a lot of work, but it's still about keeping the Luftwaffe at bay. It's still, it's still got a sting in it, to use a phrase. I don't know. It's still, it could rebuild, it could regroup, etc.
Right.
But the other main thing is the disruption of rail communications to isolate the invasion area, because a lot of transportation is by rail, especially the big tanks and such like, and the guns and materials that are building the Atlantic Wall and such like. So you knock that out, you're stopping a lot of things from happening. I'm just going to have a tiny little shout out to the Tactical Air Force, which is a tiny shout. They do incredible stuff in supporting the invasion, but they're going to be with Bomber Command in this process of what is, I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a second, the transportation plan, which is about lines of communication, especially railways. There are still going to be some raids on Germany. And what I think is quite clever that they do is they use these raids by Mosquito bombers, which you can see on the top right. Mosquito, incredible aircraft, fast, made of wood. I've got a massive kind of like wow factor with the Mosquito.
Yeah, I get to see one at the end of the month, which I'm really excited for. Yeah, I know.
Amazing.
I'm taking lots of videos and pictures of that for everybody, so don't worry about that.
Please do. I want to see them. Yeah.
I don't know if it's airworthy. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know what the state of it is, but I'll take whatever I can get. I've never seen one. So
wow. So you've got these raids by Mosquito. I mean, Mosquitoes do all sorts of things, but in this, there's about 60 or so that launch on German cities and drop a few bombs and make you think, oh, is this another raid? Because it's been continuing for years and years, and there are going to be a few conventional raids on cities just to do the kind of like, oh, is this still happening? What's happening now? But generally the attention is going to be on Overlord, and especially quelling the Luftwaffe, or whatever the word is, stopping the Luftwaffe. I mean, as I say, targets are in Germany. There are lines of railway hubs and such, like Aachen is one of them that's targeted a number of times in the build up because of its railway hub. Harris is quite keen when it comes to Germany and such like. So he wants these raids to continue, but it is minimal. Right. And I just want to talk about very, very quickly Oboe. So I've got the Oboe is absolutely key at this point, and absolutely key to Normandy, to Overlord and the air campaign. I won't be able to go into the scientific details with this because that's not my brain, but essentially it's about beams that go out that can give a fix to an aircraft. Its range is limited, so it can't reach far into Germany. So another factor actually that affects the Battle of Berlin is you lose things like Oboe, which gives a very, very accurate fix. And these can then be used by usually the Pathfinders that can drop flares onto a target. And they're usually guided by, you have this idea of a master bomber that will go, drop bombs on green flares. Oh, no, they'll find out that's not right. Drop red flares here. That's the target. Ignore green, go red. There'll be this guiding process. And Oboe, as I say, Oboe is really key in finding these fixes, and it will be in Normandy. But the curvature of the Earth stops it after a certain point. So any flat earthers watching, Oboe. And now
I don't know what to say to that.
Sorry, little.
It's true. It's just funny because it's true. I mean, it does. That's literally the problem.
But Oboe is discovered by the Germans, and they have found a way to jam it. But unknown to them, the waves that that were kind of like discovered by the Germans and they were to jam, the RAF stopped using. Mm-hmm. But to fox the Germans, they still broadcast on the old wave, but they tell their bombers to use the new wave.
Yeah.
Now, this comes in just before the invasion, and the Germans don't know about it until, I think, July 44, so they're a good couple of months into it. And I love that story. It's just one of those, you can just see the boffins working it out and going, oh, well, what if we did another wave and we still broadcast the other one? Oh, that's a good idea, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it just makes perfect sense, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, just before we forget, and maybe I can't remember if. Sorry, just 1 second here. I just want to check something. Okay, yeah, we do get there in a second. So sorry, I just wanted to double check about the railways because we're just getting lots of questions.
That's next.
So if we want to keep moving forward, if that's all right with
you.
Yeah,
the railways, absolutely, yeah. So as I say, there's this plan to knock the railways out, the lines of communication, sending troops up. So it's from March 1944. So actually we're going back ever so slightly. There's a first raid by 261 Halifaxes, 6 Mosquitoes, and there are no losses in this first raid. And the losses continue to be light. The targets hit successfully. Generally, the technique, as I say, you've got this multiple bomb technique, but there will be Mosquitoes ahead that will dive down, drop flares using oboe, and you've got the target there. And I say main targets are railways, and there is heavy disruption. I mean, you've got some images there of the absolute destruction. You've got a bridge destroyed. You've got a marshalling yard there, which is pretty much unrecognizable. There are 2,513 heavy bomber sorties in total. So that's not including the medium bombers and the tactical air force that are attacking the nearer hubs and such like. Wagon numbers reduced from 70 to 10,000 over this period. I mean, that is just stopping the things being there to transport, let alone the lines, let alone the hubs, let alone these places. And hundreds of locomotives are destroyed by the Allied air forces. This is a joint effort, United States Army Air Force and Bomber Command. So I'm not gonna give complete praise to Bomber Command, but this is they do play a very, very huge part in this. As I say, 2,513 sorties over this period of the transportation plan. And it's described as declared by the German Air Ministry on the 14th of June as practically impossible for any large-scale movement of German troops. Now, this is something that you see continue during Normandy with the domination of the air and this disruption. That journeys, even from fairly nearer parts in France, instead of taking days, are taking weeks. I mean, also they're having to travel at night, but there's still this disruption, and the heavies play a part in that. They are bombing these marshalling yards, these hubs, etc., etc. And the transportation plan is so important, and it couldn't really have gone better for the Allies.
Interesting that you say that. And again, this is why I love doing this stuff, because we get to interact we get to just chat like this, but we have people watching and people who know what they're talking about. When it comes to trains, especially, which is great to have Phil Blood watching today. He says they failed.
Really? I'm gonna have to chat to him.
I mean, he's sung your praises before, so
he has. And
you guys can fight that out later. I don't know.
He's probably right, but I mean, you look at the figures. You look at 70 to 10,000 in terms of wagons. You look at the reports, the German reports saying, it's practically impossible. The railways are,
yeah. I mean, and then we have Alex.
I mean, it's not going to stop them completely, obviously.
Well, you're never going to stop them completely. But then Alex, of course, being Canadian, is coming more in the middle ground. It wasn't great always, but it did some eventually. Canadian sometimes is where trying to find the middle grounds here. But I mean, it's just an interesting part of this. Like this is what I was talking about off the top. There's controversies. It's still not fully understood. There's lots of debate on all these topics. So again, it's great to have these in the moment discussions.
Absolutely, and I think I said this before the show. I'm up in the clouds, so I'm looking at what the bombers are doing, what happens on the ground. I don't really have the detail on the ground. So if someone says, "Oh, actually, 47, I don't know, Wehrmacht division was moving fine between so and so," I go, "Okay, I didn't know that."
Well, as we know, we know Phil does this stuff, and he knows how to research. I think you mentioned this earlier, but the turnover on the rails eventually, at some points, is pretty quick. I do remember that. Which again, you say you're taking the top down, literally perspective here. But again, it's that number I think that's key, is the destroying of the engines. That's a big one. That's difficult to replace quickly. Making those is not easy to do. So it's a part of the debate I think that will go on
for a
long time for this.
Yeah,
about
and
what worked and what didn't work and all of that.
Yeah, and one of the things I think it is the Strategic Air Defense Against Germany volume says is, from an air perspective, this gets lots of ticks, but we're not going to talk about what it, which is a bit of a cop out, but there we go.
I mean, we know Phil loves his trains, and we know he knows how to research. So, I mean, maybe maybe we can have you guys on and argue about that at some point. I mean, it's just an interesting one, I think, because I'm not invested on either side in this one. It's just interesting to hear these two perspectives on it and how you can go about viewing the same thing. So I think that's what's really good.
I'd absolutely love to.
Anyway, so let's keep moving here. If that's
going on to the next slide. I'm going to absolutely butcher this pronunciation.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try. And
I'm not even going to try. I'm not going to try.
I should know better.
So there is this raid. On the described area on the slide, but I should say that in April and May, Bomber Command also had an offensive on Luftwaffe airfields as well. Obviously, this is part of the plan to stop the Luftwaffe from being effective. There is this raid on an aeroworks. It's led by Leonard Cheshire, who's pictured on the slide. Incredible individual, incredible career throughout the war, and he's part of 617 Squadron. Which are the dam busters, famous dam busters. And his technique, again, it follows into this: dive in fast and low in a Mosquito, oboe supported, too fast to be hit by ground fire, drop the flares, bounce back out. He's supported by a couple of Lancasters that can drop follow-up flares to mark this target. And this aeroworks is completely destroyed by all accounts. There are diversion raids as well. So another thing, so this is a good example of showing how these, and this is at night, and I think it really demonstrates how far Bomber Command have come when it comes to bombing. When you use the word precision in the Second World War sense, it's not at all like it would be today. Let's clarify on that. In terms of 1944, the factory is hit. It's not a guided missile that can hit a coin on the floor. It's
funny that you mentioned that, because I have Phil who's watching, and anytime we keep talking, he really wants me to do something on precision bombing in World War II. Like, he keeps pushing for that, and I'm just I haven't had time to schedule anything right now.
That would be fascinating.
How to go about that, but it's a great idea. Just I haven't literally had time to think about it, to be honest.
And there are attempts throughout the war, and even the most precise of precision are way off by what you would consider now. But considering at the time, it's like, oh wow, that was within 1,000 yards of, it's just like 80 meters. Wow, that's a hit, But there we go. Anyway, this is one example of a raid that demonstrates Bomber Command coming on leaps and bounds, absolute world away from what it was before. And actually, this new technique, so this is 5-group Bomber Command. You've got what I dub the Pathfinders, whose job, as it were, is to, I mean, it's self-description, isn't it, a Pathfinders, to guide the way, to drop the flares, to be that unit that does that. Actually, 5-group here prove themselves that they're able to do that. And Harris gives them permission to act like this after the raid. So you've got the Pathfinders, but you've also got, and there is this controversy with the Pathfinders, because Harris, I'm painting Harris like he doesn't like anything, but maybe that's the case. I don't know. He was against the Pathfinders, and his reason was grabbing all the experienced crews, putting them into one group is going to be detrimental to the rest of Bomber Command. Losing those experience, which I can kind of get his argument. So this is kind of going into Harris's idea of, hey, look, other groups can do it. We don't need this, elite group, so there's kind of like this discussion going on, but I found that interesting anyway, so I thought I'd slip that in.
It's something that is discussed, and this isn't even just an Air Force issue, right? That's across services, right? It happens all the time. So
I'll probably get a load of people saying over this, but I'm not a big fan of the whole elite thing, really.
No, me neither.
Generally, it isn't generally the thing.
It doesn't do anybody any good.
No. Oh, that's a talk on its own.
That's a whole other. That could be that's its own show right there.
That's its own show.
Anyway,
if we go to the next slide, obviously we haven't talked about the
Yes.
Kriegsmarine, the German Navy. So you've got things like E-boats there. You've got pictured on the right, fast boats that can come in and launch torpedoes and be an absolute nuisance. There's not a lot of them. The German Navy isn't the force it was at all in say 4041. The capital ships, the big battleships are useless. You got that's gone. They don't have any aircraft carriers. It's just they've got the U-boat force, but that's dwindled. And I mean, that's its own show, isn't it? They're not really they're not really much, but they are still going to be a potentially a pain, to put it lightly. So you've got one of the things that Bomber Command does is mine laying, and you've got a picture of a mine there at the top, long tube thing you've got there that will be dropped from low level. And there are 2,198 mine sorties in direct support of Overlord. This is something the Bomber Command have done throughout the war, is lay mines and done this. 5 group actually that I just mentioned were usually the ones that did it. The low level specialists, again, that's perhaps why they're picked for raids like the Dam Busters and Augsburg and all these sort of things. But anyway, that's another thing. And there are also sorties made either side of the invasion area on ports and harbors, so it's a little bit of trying to keep that area shut off. You don't want to give the game away too much, so there is this spreading of these raids. But these raids, 130 vessels are put out of action, various vessels, and it does its job in stemming. There's not a lot there to begin with, but again, it's worth mentioning that this is another factor. And blocking ports. There's a lot of blocking of ports, and these see the first daylight raids by the heavy bombers. First since May 1943. They're escorted by Spitfires. You've got a picture there on the bottom left of formation of Spitfires. I always seem to get a Spitfire into my talk.
How does that happen?
I know they're not even my favorite fighter, but that's another
sorry, there was a question from Darren. Hopefully I can find it. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
We're competing direct with World War II TV today. I don't want to lose Darren due to lack of not answering his questions. I'm just kidding. You should watch what he show after we're done. Anyway, so this is not necessarily directly connected to Kriegsmarine, but and was there more raids on other areas? Did they? I guess the simple way is, did they increase hitting more other areas to kind of throw the front off Normandy, or was it balanced? Or
I've got a stat later on that I'll probably say again is, there were other raids. So generally you'd have 2 in, say, the Pas de Calais to 1 in Normandy.
Right.
You try and spread it. Also, Brittany was targeted and such. It was spread out, and there usually were more in other areas. But again, it mixed up week by week. You would change it up. You really don't want to give the game away if they go, there's a lot here and not many there, and there's really a lot there compared to the others. Again, that's the other thing that you could do.
Leaving it out can be just as
So it's constantly. It's constantly. I mean, I'm gonna talk about the deception.
Perfect. I just didn't want to forget, because it just made me think about you talking about hitting the other spots.
Yeah.
Kind of trying to do that cordoning off that's talked about. I don't want to say the dirty word of today, but of the railways. But you don't tend to think about it in terms of the Navy, right? Of the Kriegsmarine and limiting the Kriegsmarine. You don't it doesn't extend to the channel for whatever reason. And maybe that's just me, but sorry, that's just my opinion on that one. But
yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I'm mentioning all these things because Bomber Command by now is a larger force, but it's being asked to do a lot of things. There are a lot of things to consider, as well as transportation, as well as the Kriegsmarine, as well as the naval defenses, as well as the Luftwaffe. There's so many things that need to be considered and undertaken.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you go to the next slide, actually, that kind of fits in with what I'm saying about how much of a maximum effort this really is by the air forces. This is a map from the official histories. It's mainly looking at the RAF, and you can see at the wings you've got Coastal Command. Their job is to hunt and look for U-boats, which is what they do, which is again a very important thing. You've got deception raids. You've got reconnaissance, general reconnaissance. You've got focus there in Belgium and northern France, the hubs and lines of communication that are being targeted. So we think about Normandy being the invasion area, and this kind of fits in with the previous question. This is how wide the raids are. This is how wide the scale is. And you might think, oh, the raid in Pas de Calais wasn't as important as a raid on Cherbourg or a raid on Caen or whatever. Yeah. Actually, no, they're all important. They all play their part. They're all doing something. And there's on D-Day 11,590 aircraft involved of all types. 5,656 of Royal Air Force. Bomber commands. They've lost up until D-Day 300 aircraft and about 2,000 air crew. But this is a lot. Yeah, this is 200, not 2,000. Attacking invasion targets. And they'd grown in size over this time as well. So they're about 65 squadrons in March 1944, and they jumped to about 75, I think, by June. So they're growing as well. So again, that answers that question actually about the sizes and stuff. So you've had these losses in the Battle of Berlin going into Nuremberg. You've had this move over. Actually, the bomber forces are growing. So yeah, and I think I just really want to emphasize just how big this effort is by all air forces, not just the Royal Air Force and not just Bomber Command. It is a combined operation. There's a lot of planning, and as well the turnaround in the sense of what Bomber Command was up to at the end of March 1944 to then be able to be a part of this and take on so many different roles, to be able to launch these precision raids, to develop the marking techniques and such like. It's huge, and I think it's credit to them to be able to do that.
I agree. And sorry, this is Alex has said this before, and there's always discussions about casualties and what is the Battle of Normandy, all that stuff. I think this is a good point that's getting more traction in amongst historians, right? That the Battle of Normandy doesn't just start June 6th.
Yeah.
And you're case in point right here.
Absolutely, yeah. It's certainly for the Royal Air Force, the Allied Air Forces, it goes back. Definitely, yeah. I mean, you have that question: when did the Second World War start? As well, there are the wider.
Let's
not go into that. But
we're not doing that. Nope. That'll be 8 hours later. We have no conclusions.
Pretty much. Welcome to my world. So if we go to the next slide, we're now looking at the night before D-Day.
Sorry.
And there we go.
There we go.
So days leading up, radar installations are targeted, and wireless telephone stations, and the HQ for Signals Intelligence Service was, quote, made completely useless after a raid by 100 bombers. And actually, when you get to D-Day, about 18% of German radar apparatus points are working on the whole of the northwest France.
Yeah. Which
I think is just incredible. And now, obviously, the Tactical Air Force play a huge part in this, but Bomber Command does as well. And it's a world away for someone. When I studied the Battle of Britain, when you look at the scale and you look at the effort, you just look. This is a pre-invasion plan done and executed properly. 18%. That's just absolutely crazy. And of course, there's coastal batteries as well. They've been targeted since the end of May. Again, not to give the game away, they're targeted along the whole of the coast. Most were destroyed as they were being built, so they would see the foundations, because once they're built, they're pretty hard to get rid of, which is something that does happen. But there's and one thing that I found quite sobering, and a lot of aircrew, when they were told this, was before the night of the 5th, they were told, press on, whatever happens. You're going to that target. You are going to bomb it. Whatever happens, whatever the losses, whatever the cost. And that kind of rung alarm bells. Obviously, they didn't know. Of like, well, this has got to be something pretty important. And a lot of them flying back saw the Armada and such like, and went, there we go. That makes sense. But so and this is the stat. For deception purposes, every Normandy battery targeted 2 in Brittany and the Pas de Calais were also bombed. So this is what I mean by the importance of this huge stretch of operation. That the raids on Pas de Calais on that night were just as important as the ones on Normandy itself. And it's an impressive toll. I mean, on the 5th, they dropped over 16,000 tons of bombs on 21 batteries. 1,211 sorties in that night, which is the biggest that Bomber Command have done yet in any night, is the support of the invasion, which makes sense. And it's the scale and such like is just incredible. I'd say most of the batteries that are destroyed in kind of like the build up. On the night itself, it's mixed results, and in fact generally it's not great results,
right? But
you get these huge craters, but these are pretty difficult to really destroy. Again, I'd love to hear from people that know a little bit more about what happens on the ground. But my understanding is, there are a lot that were in the process of being built, or a lot on half construction. There is a deception plan, but it's not perfect when it comes to actually knocking these ones out on the day. But there we go. So if we get to the next stage, obviously I'll try and get through this. I'm rambling on, aren't I?
Yeah, no, people are loving it, so ramble away.
I want to talk about countermeasures, because we talked about the diversionary raids and such like. There is much more to this. So brief shout out to 100 Group Bomber Command that are created for the purpose of countermeasure and also for offensive night fighter purposes. They're the masters really of electronic warfare, with tech and one-upmanship and broadcasting false messages and such like. Absolutely incredible story on their own. Now they launch a jamming screen, which you can see on that map in the channel, called Operation Mandrel. And they're using this technology called Mandrel. It's the first time it's being used, and it is, it's foxing because it's brand new, and it jams German radios and coastal stations if they've survived the bombing, which is the big thing. So they're thinking about that. They're thinking, okay, well, we can target them and blow them up, but what if we do miss? What if this doesn't work out? So again, it's credit to the absolute planning and thinking that there's just so much going on. As I say, they're Bomber Command aircraft that are doing this. And one of the more famous ones of this night is, again, 617 Squadron, the down buses. There are 16 Lancasters that perform orbits above a group of surface craft, and they're dropping window. So if people who don't know, they're very, very clever idea. Sheets of aluminium foil. You can see them on the top right. They're just dropped, and it looks like a huge formation in the sky to radar. Now, the Germans have caught on to window at this point. So it's a little bit of touch and go, but there's also balloons that have got reflectors on them. And the manner of the 617 Squadron aircraft, they fly in elliptical circles, and it does work. There's also an operation very similar called Taxable, which is a very similar
question that was going to be discussed. So
you've got this as well, and as I say, they're very, very similar. It is this idea of trying to fox where the invasion is going to be. You've also got aircraft of Bomber Command dropping dummy parachutists, and also rifle simulators in northern France. People might have seen The Longest Day and seen these incredibly wonderful looking, realistic sort of I don't know, quarter size GIs. They didn't look like that.
They didn't even look like
you've got one there. It's just a sack full of straw that's got arms and legs. But they're dropped in northern France again as an attempt to fox the Germans. Again, if someone wants to come in with how well they worked, I don't really know. I just know that they were used. I imagine the initial scare, seeing them in the sky, would have created a little bit of panic, but in terms of major disruption, I don't know. I can't really imagine it. But again, it's all part of the deception technique. And I'd love to know more about that, to be honest.
It's so fascinating, right? One of those, because of The Longest Day, which I rip on all the time.
Oh, same.
I think rightfully so. Anyway, it's just because it's one of those, it's deception. It's got a sexy element to it of we're throwing the Germans off because people love that stuff, right? So I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, but again, the drops are all over the place on their own. So does that contribute? I don't know. That's not what we're here for today.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got in the film, I think it's called Rupert, isn't it?
Yeah, they're called Rupert. Rupert in the Americans is Oscar, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, same thing.
And they drop, and apparently, according to the film, hundreds of troops are diverted and shooting into these bushes and stuff. I mean, I don't really buy that. Anyway,
I don't know either, but anyway,
Anyway, we'll move on. And I say, this is all part of the deception plan, and this is Bomber Command again being absolutely stretched. And as I say, the week of D-Day, Bomber Command flew 5,000 sorties, which is actually more than Bomber Command flew in the first 9 months of the war, the whole of the Second World War. It's how small they were then, but it's also kind of like how big they are now. And I think
it's just the one thing I did want to mention about today, because that's just more I learned, is the scale of this operation. I mean, Overlord generally is massive. Like it's such small bread at the beginning. Obviously, it's important at the war, but this is just massive. The things that are involved, and I'm not just looking at the Canadian effort because that's obviously my focus. But how massive that was for Canada, blow that up with other nations, and it's mind-boggling in a lot of ways. And I think that gets lost a little bit the further we get away from the events.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my insight for the day.
No, I totally agree. It really is quite, I guess, humbling, isn't it? You look at these figures and the effort put in and everything. But we're talking about supporting ground forces, which again, I'm happy for people to jump in here because I'm talking about it from their perspective. But the idea again is German troop positions, lines of communication again, should I say, but also troop positions. Now this, as I say, is about stopping troops and getting to the front, but there's also the idea of directly supporting troops with heavy bombers. So bombing not far away. I think it's about, at some point, it's about 1,000 yards. I don't know what that is in, what's that, just around a kilometer? Just under a kilometer? Just over a kilometer?
Sorry, I'm just trying to do it in my head.
It's
around a kilometer.
Which really, when you think about these hundreds and hundreds of bombers dropping flares and that close is pretty close.
And sorry, can I just jump in here before I forget, because this has come up now twice, because you mentioned oboe earlier. Is it used at this point?
I should add. This is again. So you've got raids that are able to take place in daylight, but with these operations, obviously they're at the mercy of the army. So the RAF can't say, 12 o'clock would be wonderful. And it's like, well, we don't launch operations then. It's bright daylight. You've lost half the day. It'll be let's do this at dawn. Let's do this just before dawn. So there'll be a little bit of light, but you would need oboe. You would need the target markers. You would need the master bombers. It's essentially the same technique that has been developed. But oboe is absolutely, you're quite right to jump in. Absolutely key here. It's what helps because they're not bombing in direct daylight. Sometimes these raids would be as low as 4,000 feet, which really is incredibly low when you look at what raids are over Germany and such like. Again, an effort to improve accuracy and such like, I guess. There is doubt in this because of experiences in Italy. I think Monte Cassino, there's an attempt and it really doesn't work and such like. So there is a little bit of concern. Now, the figure that's jumping in that's saying do this is probably going to surprise everybody. It's Lee Mallory. He's there going, why don't we use them? They're proving accurate. They're bombing these aero works. They're bombing marshalling arts and such like. We've got oboe, we've got the flares, we've got the technique, we've got the master bombers. Let's try it to support troops. And he's the one that's the loudest voice in the Air Force. And it happens. I mean, there is this anxiety, being so close, and there are obviously friendly fire, blue on blue, whatever you want to call it, happens.
Multiple times.
And there is a fear, and one of the things that happens is before Goodwood, there are a lot of anxieties by the army, and the bombers are pushed slightly further up so that they end up bombing a huge chunk of Caen, and not really doing much damage to the German forces on the ground, which is one of those things. So I think there's about 8 raids like this. there's not many because it's a big effort and such like.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, and I guess, does it give the game away, really? In some respects, you're looking at the First War with the mass long artillery barrages, and when you're not actually destroying a lot of the troops, you're disrupting. Yeah, the ones that have survived right at the front line are going to be waiting. I don't know. I'm not a ground technician, but I get the idea that that's one of the issues with this.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely a complicated. Sorry, you had the wrong. It wasn't Goodwood. It was Turnwood you were talking about. They're going to jump on you. Get your slides of con right there. But yeah, I mean, and then Goodwood is after, and the one that, and I'm talking about this tomorrow on the channel. With,
it is, isn't it? It is,
with Mark Zilke is tractable and totalized. Can't not think about it when thinking about these things because it goes wrong twice. Because of a communication mix-up, which is interesting, I think. Because it's funny that you mentioned Lee Mallory about this because, like I said, there's a communication mix-up between the ground forces and the air forces, and that gets people killed. So yeah, it does have its successes and sort of, and does give away the game. I mean, I don't want to get into the whole ground thing here with that. Maybe I'll do that tomorrow. But it's I'm mentioning the bad guy that lots of Canadians like to talk about with Simmons, but about all of that. But it's interesting to think about these things in these scales and from the ground, from the air, because it's not often talked about from the air. Anyway,
I mean, this is the thing when it comes to the sense of precision bombing now and then is Bomber Command would tick most of these offers. Yeah, apart from the incidents of a couple of instances of friendly fire where flares are let off or whatever. I think there's one instance where that happens. They're looking at it going, yeah, we bombed where you said, but it's not actually it's behind or it's whatever. It's causing a mess behind, which is the defender's paradise or whatever. So that's where you come in as a from an air perspective. Yep, bombed where you said, did what you did. Yeah, we were accurate. Hey, we were within I don't know, 100, 200, 300 yards, and on the ground it's like, are you serious?
That's the thing, right? And another reason why I like doing this, because we can bring that perspective in. It's hard to say that in a book, right? So the guy, as we talk about the bombing for Operation Tractable, oh, by the way, 100-yard zone is different on the ground than it is in the air. I mean, it's not easy to get that across. So I think it's just really interesting to think about it that way, especially Normandy, because now that we're into the ground forces part, right? It's a war of attrition and it's a grind, right? This is reminiscent of the First World War in a lot of ways. But now you're fighting it with this new technology and the close, sometimes too close, weapon support, right? So it's a whole other way of thinking about it, and stuff that I think gets lost in the big picture of all of this, which air forces usually tend to be, right? When you're doing from the Army perspective or the ground perspective, sorry. It's just an interesting thing, I think, about. Well, this is an interesting question. You might not know, and I know it changes throughout the campaign, but Bomber Command liaison officers, were they ever sent to the front? And then who was responsible for establishing the bomb lines?
I'm not so sure on the bomb lines itself. I imagine it would be I imagine the Army would have most of the say over what would work. That's certainly my impression. That's a very good question. But yeah, there were RAF personnel on the ground. They came in on D-Day itself. They were there. They were also there guiding the Tactical Air Force as well. So yeah, there were RAF personnel on the ground, absolutely, and they would assist with this as well.
And Alex jumps in really well again with a good point, because this is how it was done. It's done as a timing run from the coast. Your timing's off. You're off target. I think that's what happens with Totalize or Tractable. One of them is wrong marked, and then the other one, some of the runs are off, which is Anyway, so it's a really interesting part of how I like to think about it, because I'm trying to expand my thinking about all these things and not just trying to take the one perspective. Like I'm trying to understand things like this, but also like naval fire, right?
Absolutely,
and how difficult this all is, and the blame game which goes around, which is why I kind of chuckled about the whole, who's responsible for the bomb lines, because like it was your fault, no, it was your fault, like there's a lot of finger pointing going on. It's something I come across all the time.
And I think there's changing of where's the best place to bomb and such, like with quite a few operations, and it's probably an absolute nightmare, actually.
Yeah, I don't know how they were able to nail this stuff down. To be honest.
But yeah, if we move on to the next section,
yeah,
talk about. I mean, it had been bombed on June 6th. There were leaflets that were dropped saying that, you know, there's a good chance of bombing and such like. And there are numerous raids on the city, with around 75% of it being destroyed. And yeah, there's huge raids on it. This is the note that I got muddled up earlier, was the Goodwood, the largest of the attacks. 7,700 tons of bombs dropped. This is 18th of July, 1,570 heavy and 349 medium Allied aircraft. This is Bomber Command and it's United States Army Air Force. I mean, can you imagine that flying over nearly 2,000 air? I mean, I was watching the Queen's Jubilee, and they flew not too far, and I thought that was impressive, and that was probably about 60 aircraft. You know?
I know.
So yeah, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And Lee Mallory witnessed this. He flies in a captured Fuselage and looks down and sees it. And,
right, yeah.
I mean, can you imagine what it would have looked like from the air as well as the ground? It just would have been absolutely mind-bending. And as I say, there is this question over the civilian casualties, the French casualties, and there is. So we're going back a few months beforehand. This notion of, okay, we're going to be bombing marshalling arms, we're going to be bombing targets that are going to have a French population around it,
right? And
there is this mention of keeping to targets that would mean there would be no risk of more than 150 casualties by the French. And I mean, it's said, it's not a written rule. Churchill was very vocal about it. He didn't want to upset the French. I mean, you've got to look at what happens, you know, in 1940, and you've got to think about, torch and the relationship between the British and the French. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider here. So you can totally get Churchill being vocal about this. But this was never part of the plan.
No.
And the Allied bombing of Normandy, the figure I've got is about 20,000 French civilians killed. There's some estimates that are higher, some suggest much higher. But the estimate was about 100,000 that was going to be the cost of liberating Normandy and of the bombing. And again, in the literature, there's a feeling of it was one of those, I don't know what the word is, not a necessity, but it was just, if you're going to target, you know.
It's sometimes the English language fails us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think because we're struggling a little bit because the historiography of this has changed a little. It's getting looked at, and it sends from, again, the ground, the French civilians. And to me, that's just endlessly fascinating because it's such the horrid stories that you're reading about Caen, especially. But then again, you know, the people who just did this to you are now liberating you after your city's been squashed, you know, and your family's dead. It's tough. It's tough. And coming up with conclusions on this one are difficult.
I don't really want to start, to be honest. It's one of those things you have to mention it. You have to talk about it. You know, but it's one of those things of like, I don't know where to begin. I really don't know where to begin.
I don't either. Like I've talked to other people about this on the channel and some other places, and I did one with David Boris on the civilian administrations when they come in, right? The army civilian administrations that come in, and it's just Caen is his big case study because of obvious reasons. It's a difficult one, and I don't have the answer either. And whoever does end up taking this one on in the big scale is braver than I.
Absolutely.
Nail this one down.
Well, the next slide is a shout out for Canadians. Andrew Minarski. Is born in Winnipeg, Canada, descended from Polish immigrants. I mean, I imagine most Canadians interested in this period would have heard of him, would know the story, but I think it's worth sharing for those who won't.
If you don't know, it's an amazing one.
Yeah, now he was mid-upper gunner, so you got the Lancaster pictured there. It's the gun turret right at the top of the dome, right in the middle of the Lancaster. He's that's his job. He's the gunner there. He's manning that, and he's part of a crew, and he's really great friends with the tail gunner. So the tail gunner, the gun right at the back on the tail, it kind of gives it away the name, doesn't it? And they've been a number of operations now. At this stage, Minarski is a sergeant, and it's Pat Brophy who's the tail gunner pilot officer. They would have this little thing where Minarski would salute when they said goodnight to his friend Pat, and it would be like, come on, sort of thing. Now, there was a raid that the crew were on the 12th, 13th of June, where their Lancaster A Apple 419 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, Moose Squadron. Got that in there. I love that.
As of course there is, yeah.
It was on its raid on Cambrai, and it was attacked by a night fighter and was hit by flak. Now there'd been maneuvers by the pilot, but the plane is now on fire, and the skipper says, "Okay, bail out, get out." Now Minarski jumps out of his turret, goes to escape. Now to escape, he has to go back towards the tail gunner, and there's a little door at the side that he jumps out of. Now, as he's about to do that, he notices Brophy is trapped. The turret is kind of at an angle, and he can't open the rear doors to get out. So you get out of a turret with these rear doors behind. He's stuck. It's absolutely not moving. And as I say, the aircraft's on fire at this point, and the fire is chucking in. And Minarski decides not to jump out. He's going to save his buddy. He's going to save his mate. So he tries to get to the back, battling through the fire. He gets there. He's trying desperately to smash through. I mean, this is all in seconds,
Yes.
This is all really, really quick.
Very
the fire's raging. And the other thing you got to remember about these aircraft is they're loaded with fuel, they're loaded with bombs, they're loaded with high octane fuel. The oxygen, they are fireballs, essentially, that they go up so quickly. So he's trying to get to his friend, and his flying suit is now being doused in the hydraulic oil. So that's going to catch up in flames, but he's trying to get. And meanwhile, Brophy is gesturing, saying, "Get the hell out! I'm done. I'm gone. You get out. Save yourself." But he tries. Eventually, he has to give up. There's no giving. Before he jumps out, Minarski salutes his friend for a final time, thinking, "That's it. He's gone." And he descends to the ground. Now, Minarski, as I say, he was covered in this hydraulic oil. His suit is on fire. His parachute is damaged. It opens, but he falls to the ground, heavily burned, very heavily, and he eventually dies. By some absolute miracle, Brophy survives. The aircraft crashes, and the turret is flown away from the tail of the aircraft, rolls along the ground, and Brophy essentially walks away with just a few cuts and bruises, and eventually joins the French resistance. Absolutely incredible story. Not knowing the fate of his buddy. Now when he finds out, he gets back, he tells him Minarski's story and says, "This is incredible. This guy, battling through the flames, etc., etc. Didn't have to do that. Was ordered to jump out, but he wanted to save his friend." Well, he's given a Victoria Cross, and this is given after the war. So there's a little bit of a thing where he's technically the first VC in the Second World War of the Royal Canadian Air Force, but he's also technically, I think, the last, because it's a bit of a weird sort of
it's a weird one, yeah.
And he was sergeant, but he was actually promoted to pilot officer the day before, so he is pilot officer at this point. And the thing that I love is there's many ways that Minarski is immortalized. There's schools named after him. There's an award that's named after him. But the one that touches me is at the side of the second airworthy Lancaster in the world is, as you can see, this little memorial with the Victoria Cross, and it's painted up in 419 Squadron's Vera, as she's affectionately known, VRA. Yeah, it's just, and that is the tribute to what is an absolutely incredible story, and one that I had to talk about. I absolutely had to talk about this. It's just incredible. And as I say, there's only the second airworthy Lancaster. Hopefully, there's going to be 3 soon. In Canada, in Ontario.
Well,
and
this story. Sorry, I just jump in because obviously I know the story very well and read the citation. I don't even know how many times now, hundreds.
Yeah,
I because I profiled it a couple of days ago when the event happened, and it's everywhere. Like you said, there's a school, but Vera especially, because it's funny for just so many reasons. I've seen Vera in the steel, I guess, in the flesh.
Yeah.
I got to touch it, which was cool because it's at the Heritage Warplane.
Yes.
The Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum just outside Hamilton, Ontario.
Yeah.
It is still airworthy. Apparently, they had an engine trouble a couple days ago. The only reason I mention this because I'm going at the end of the month, and it was supposed to be part of the event to fly because it flies almost regularly, like every couple of days.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just very expensive to do. But it might be grounded for that event, unfortunately. But I do have footage of it in the air on the channel, which is amazing. It literally flew over my head. Like they pushed it into the hangar over my head. Like I could have touched it if I wanted to, but I probably would have gotten in trouble. But especially where Hamilton's located, right? Hamilton is near Toronto. And a lot of Canadians live in Toronto, so it does flights over Toronto. So a lot of people know about Vera, and that it's Mynarski is part of the story, and they dedicated it to him. They have a thing at the museum for him. It's an amazing story that a lot of people are aware of, and because of the great work that the museum does and the upkeep and flying Vera literally around the largest city in the country. Like they literally fly it over downtown Toronto, and people take pictures of it all summer long. It's amazing to see online. It's always great, but it's amazing. We are so lucky that we have this in Canada, and I'm so excited to go just even see it again. Even if it's grounded, I don't really care.
I have seen Vera fly when she came over. Oh,
right.
God.
Yes. Yeah.
A few years back now. Yeah, I saw her a couple of times at a couple of air shows, and seeing two Lancasters was
That's like I'm so upset that I missed that. But getting one is amazing. Well, another story, because this was years and years and years ago before I even visited, and I was going to my office downtown when I was doing my PhD, and Vera comes out of nowhere. Wow. I'm walking to the bus. That was just a really chance. I got lucky that day to see it go over because it was flying to the base or airstrip on the other side of the river in Quebec for some event, and it was amazing to see. But anyway, sorry, is this the last one, or do we have more?
I think there's a couple more, but just very, very quickly, as I say, Mynarski was 27, which is considered an old man, just to say, these guys are normally 19, 20, 21 years old, so just to throw that in. But anyway, I'm going to backtrack very, very quickly and talk about Operation Crossbow. You might have seen the movie. I don't know, but this is the operation. So there had been a raid on Peenemünde, Operation Hydra, which is where the hub of V weapons is kind of, it was mainly the V2, but that was on the 17th, 18th of August, 1943, and it caused serious delay to the V2 weapons program, delaying it by absolutely months and months. It wasn't without its cost. About 40 aircraft were shot down in something of a mini, say half the version of a Nuremberg thing, where they're picked out. Now the development happens, and there are these V1 racks. You've got the V1 there, the flying bomb, the Doodlebug. That you can see on the left there, which is a pilotless aircraft that you put on a ramp. You point it roughly in the direction of London, fire the rocket, and it goes, and it does whatever it wants to do, to be perfectly honest.
Pretty much.
It's very, very crude. It's got quite a sophisticated gyroscope system in terms of that period of the war, but it's not really in the sense that we think of drones these days,
not
or
even
pilotless aircraft. It's miles away, but still, Now, these racks are being built and set up all over northern France into Belgium, pointing towards London and the home counties, and there's quite a lot of alarm. So Eisenhower directs bombing raids, Bomber Command to attack these, as well as the United States Army Air Force, and 103 out of 140 of these racks are put out of action by May 1944, which I think is pretty incredible, really, considering. I mean, it's a world away when you get to the V2s, which are the rockets, because they're mobile. You can't, by the time you send bombers there, they packed their bags and left and launched the rocket. This is a different story, but even so, still impressive to find them, knock out so many.
Yeah.
The first V1 attack comes on the 13th of June. So that's Goodwood. That's Goodwood. I keep doing that, don't I? That's Crossbow.
Crossbow.
Oh, God,
Army guys are gonna be all over you.
God. So that's that. And then you've got the first attack, the V1 attack on Britain, 13th of June, 15th of June. You've got the first ones that land in London. And as I say, the majority, land in fields or are misguided or land in the sea or are shot down by anti-aircraft fire, but plenty do get through, and there's plenty of casualties, there's plenty of destruction.
Yeah.
And as I say, there again, there's fresh alarm bells. Wow, they're actually launching these. It's you know, not long after D-Day. Overlord is very, very early stages, say 13th of June. There's worry. What can they do with this? What's going to happen here? And 40% of Bomber Command's efforts are now switched to stemming the V1s. So this is a huge, I mean, the invasion is still first. The operations linked to that are first. But second, and a very, very close second, is we need to stop these V1s from launching.
I mean, just the 40% alone is telling.
Yeah. So if we skip again to continue this battle, the 19th of June to 31st of July, Bomber Command launch fresh attacks, and they've got a weapon called Toolboy, and it is the one on the left there. There is later on a bigger version which is called Grand Slam. So Toolboy is 12,000 pounds, 5,400 kilograms, and I think Grand Slam is about twice that capacity. I can't remember the exact figures. They're developed by Barnes Wallis, who you might have heard of. Developed the bouncing bomb. It's actually a mine. I always say that just to be facetious, I guess. But yeah, that's launched by the Dan Busters, used by the Dan Busters. Famous figure. He's now designing these. The only aircraft realistically that can carry these are the Avro Lancaster with a kind of converted bomb bay, and they're stripped of extra weight so that they can carry them. And it's 617 Squadron that are doing this. And again, I use the phrase accurate bombing, that they're launched there. The general idea is that these bombs are essentially earthquake bombs is the term that's used. They're not supposed to go, right, now I'm going to drop this huge great thing on the Führer's bunker or whatever. Yeah, that's not going to work. It's what it does is you drop it a couple of 100 yards away, and it creates this earthquake effect where it shakes the foundations, where it knocks things down, where it weakens things, so that subsequent bombs can then destroy it. That's the idea, and this is used to great effect. So you have these toolboy attacks. They're followed up by a more conventional raid for these tougher targets. And yeah, as I say, that it's the same technique: dropping the flares, dropping the targets, etc., etc. And they are pretty accurate, about 100 yards. Some of them hit, and there's I think there's one time, I can't remember where it is, where one of them goes through the rail tunnel and actually blocks it, which is a 1 in a billion chance of that doing that. But yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And again, something to mention, it's a task that Bomber Command has adapted itself to, that it's had to learn. It's credit to 617 Squadron. A lot of them think of them and think Dan Busters. Well, there was a lot more. There's a lot else that was done. Now I'll bring in Harris again and say that he wasn't particularly keen on this.
Shocking.
But again, and this is something that is a theme of this, is he keeps being proven wrong. You know, his force are ready. They can, again, I use the term loosely, they can do precision raids. It's not about area bombing. They can target factories and communications hubs and use toolboy bombs. They can get rid of V1 sites. So it's a bit of I'm not digging at Harris at all. I think he does something, but this is just one of the things to consider in this period and the effort that Bomber Command put into it. But if we go to the next slide, this I think is says quite a lot.
Yeah.
So this is a letter from Eisenhower thanking Harris and Bomber Command. If I may read it, it's quite quick. So, dear Harris, your recent performance in the Caen area was an eye-opener to me and emphasizes in my mind again the magnitude of the debt that this Allied command owes to you and your officers and men. Your long record of pounding vital targets in Germany, of interrupting enemy communications, of preparing the way for our invasion force, and now literally becoming an agent in proper circumstances of close battle support, is one to excite praise and admiration. I'm truly proud to have you and your command in this Allied team. We could not possibly get along without you. Now, I mean, there's probably a little bit of flattery to that, but I think that's still like quite a big letter. I think that's still quite something for Ike to send that, especially to Harris.
Exactly.
And I just
sorry, Eisenhower knew how to smooth things. I was going to say smooth things over a little. Maybe he knew how to manage people. And he wasn't above or below doing what he had to do. But I think the wording is important, because wording to Eisenhower was important from all his other writing that I've looked at and studying. So I think it does speak to a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it does say a lot. It does speak volumes, and I wanted to share it. That this appreciation was for Bomber Command was felt right at the top at the time.
Yep.
It really is appreciated, and the effort, really, when you look at it, and I hope has come across, it is absolutely extraordinary.
Yep.
But if we go back to the next stage, so that's essentially Normandy Overlord finished. Why do we not talk about this? Why is this not? Why is it come to Bomber Command? We go, it's not in the popular collective cultural memory, certainly in Britain, that it just isn't linked, and this effort. So what happens is that things go back to Harris. Sorry, if you go to the next slide. Now, as I say, there were still limited raids on Germany, but there's now this shift to go to target oil. So we're looking at what Sparta said about targeting oil. Harris goes along with it rather grumpily. Oh, I've already gone through that nonsense with Overlord. Now I have to go through this nonsense with oil. But Portal supports it, which is a key thing. So we're bringing out Portal, we mentioned at the beginning. And to be fair, at this stage, it's not a bad shout. You think about what's limiting Germany, the oil, it's not a bad shout to give it a go at this stage. Now that the troops are on the ground, now that they're advancing into Belgium, they're at the German border, etc., etc., etc. Let's go for it. This could be the deciding factor. But Harris really still wants to go after cities. He still thinks that is the place to go. And the losses, actually, when they jump back to oil, are quite high. So there's one raid on Wessling. Again, apologies if I've mispronounced that. 27.8% loss rate, which is actually the percentage loss rate higher than Nuremberg. It's less numbers. But again, Harris goes, look, this isn't working. These oil targets, my boys aren't made for this. They're not meant to do this. And it's stupid. They're heavily defended and blah, 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 blah. And I guess and that's one of the things, as I say, that it now changes. And I mean, the losses in Normandy, I think, are quite astounding in terms of percentage. So I mentioned 27.8%. In June and July, Bomber Command losses fell to 0.4% in Normandy. Which, that's, you look at the history of Bomber Command and campaigns, that is incredibly low. I mean, they've got fighter protection. There is command of the skies. There isn't the night fighter threat that they had when they were in Nuremberg, etc., and over Germany. And now these loss rates start creeping up again as soon as they start going back to Germany. And I mean, this fact that they eventually do go back to cities, there is a little bit of a what if, I think. Going back to, and I'm not really a big fan of what ifs, to be perfectly honest, but it's one that you can't help because of some of the things I'm going to talk about in a second. Is it could have been the moment that Bomber Command's remembered for, and if it had continued, perhaps in pursuing lines of communication, if Harris hadn't dragged his feet over the oil plan. I mean, there's quite a few historians that suggest that the oil plan did quite a lot, and that if it had been pursued even more, it would have done a lot more. I mean, again, it's one of those what ifs, but it is interesting. It is very, very interesting. And we now go on to the next slide. I don't want to dwell on this far too much, but this is part of the this is part of the historiography of Bomber Command.
It is.
There were lots of other raids on Germany. There were ones that were just as destructive in terms of materially and in lives. But Dresden, the raid on Dresden in February 1945, really is a shadow over the memory of Bomber Command. If I can use that phrase, shadow, it just is always there. It's Bomber Command are either Dam Busters or Dresden, it seems, in popular sort of discussions, in public discussions.
I think you're right.
I should say that the United States Army Air Force also bombed Dresden. It wasn't just the RF. It wasn't. And actually, Harris didn't want to bomb it. This is a political thing. This is, again, Winston Churchill comes in. He's influential. Portal wants to bomb it. It's a hub again of sort of like for the Russian advance. There's all of these arguments that are being put forward. It's the aftermath that is a controversy. So there are 25,000 deaths. Yeah. It is exaggerated post-war there, and it's exaggerated by Nazi officials at the time, Goebbels, etc. Some saying 250,000, which is just absolutely, that's no. And this myth slowly develops. But the biggest thing is immediately after the raid, there is this memorandum by Churchill that says, I won't read it in full, I've got it here, but he raises the idea of there is a question over the targeting of German cities. Now, Churchill has wanted to bomb Dresden. He's been very pro-bombing Germany. He describes earlier in the war bomber commanders, the means of victory, etc., etc. Shows huge faith in bomber command, and at a moment just absolutely goes no. And he's worried about what Germany, or what he says he's worried about what Germany will be for the Allies once it's liberated, and the total destruction. And he says that however impressive these raids are, there shouldn't be raids just for the sake of mere acts of terror and wanton destruction. And now this this memorandum, this note is withdrawn. It's sent to Portal, it's withdrawn, and it's rewritten. But it's absolutely screaming in terms of this change. And certainly this idea of what bomber commanders become. And of course, there's always the question of February 45. We now look back and go, well, the war was over pretty much.
Yeah, right.
What is you've done Overlord, you've done all this. Why are you doing this? It is for the sake of destruction and such. Like, again, I don't want to dwell too much on it, but these are the sort of arguments, the discussions that are being had.
Yep.
And I think this is the key moment that overshadows not only Normandy, but also things like Bomber Command Roll and the Battle of Britain that I've tutored absolutely loads about in the past, but other things as well. And there is this kind of complexity and nuance to this story that isn't really appreciated. It does seem to be you're on one side or the other. It's like, actually, there's a huge story. There's a huge narrative here to understand.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the next slide. Kind of continuing with that the controversy has come. I'm sure many people viewing will know, but if you don't know, Bomber Command, because of Dresden, and you've got Hamburg as well, which was more destructive, but for some reason is forgotten less.
Completely accurate.
And there is this controversy, you know, there is this question of whether the bombing campaign against cities were war crimes, whether Bomber Command are war criminals. There are arguments that are thrown. The unveiling of the Bomber Command statue of Harris in 1992 was met with boos, protests. The Bomber Command memorial in Green Park, London, you can see there on the left, is vandalized. It still is. Arthur Harris was vandalized. You can see there shame scribbled across it. It's a site of protest, and it.
Yep.
As I say, it's one of the dominant sort of public discussions that really, it links into this binary sense of history where there needs to. It's far more complex. There's lots of factors to bring in. There's lots of stories to bring in. There's a whole narrative. It wasn't just Dresden, you know. And again, it's linked with after the war. There's no campaign medal. It's only until 2012 there is this national memorial. You get a clasp for the 3945 Star Bomber Command. So there's a long time where this discussion hasn't really been, or this. The narrative of it is there's just been this ongoing sort of argument that's been going on. And I'm of the belief that all the stories need to be told. So whether that is from the bomber's perspective, whether that's from those on the ground, you know, and there's some wonderful books that are being written and being brought forward about this, finally. And certainly things like, I say the International Bomber Command Center in Lincoln, that, you know, one of their missions is for reconciliation. Understanding and reconciliation, which I think is a key part of this narrative. But the reason I bring this in, I mean, this is a whole thing to unpack that really we don't have time for. But it's about the fact that there is this huge effort in Normandy, in Overlord, that is overshadowed by this discussion. And you know, when it's brought up, it's like, oh yeah, but Dresden, and it's like, that's good. That needs to be discussed. But you know, it's
Sorry, it's not the only thing that's like that. I mean, I deal with it all the time. I'm sorry, it's just with things like the 12th SS murders, especially lately.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That's they killed them too. I'm like, okay, well, you prove it. In the same way, they didn't. But anyway, that happens quite often. So a question I missed earlier from Phil Blood about. I think I know the answer, but is there any sort of memorial to any sort of part of Bomber Command at Normandy?
There is an Air Force one, I think, isn't there? But I can't think where it is.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
And there's quite a lot of I say smaller ones, but more localized ones.
Yeah, there's more. I know there's local ones, but I know I only know of ones that are fighter squadrons. I don't know of any that are bomber.
Yeah, I mean,
not off the top of my head, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's an Air Force one, but I can't remember where it is. But yeah, I mean, these raids. I mean, you've got the Runnymede Memorial in England, which is dedicated to those that have no known grave in bomber crews. Incredibly moving place. And you do get this. I mean, where these aircraft crashed, they could be anywhere. So there's often kind of like, a row of 7 white headstones somewhere.
Yeah, usually.
And such like. So yeah, it's, and then they're put in with other memorials as well alongside. So you'd be seeing all of the sort of the army and
the new one.
And then there'll be
Adversaire is the new one, is all inclusive. I do know that. But it's not Bomber Command specific.
I believe there's an Air Force one, but I don't think there's a Bomber Command.
Yeah, I don't think there's a Bomber Command one, if I'm remembering correctly. And so the Juno Beach Center speaks to Bomber Command because they try to cover all of it, which is always ambitious. But it is included, which is great. I think that answers that one.
But go ahead. I was going to say, if we go to the final slide, this is me finally concluding. I know I've rambled on for absolutely ages. I think that, from my perspective, and I think generally when you look at it, Bomber Command did play a vital role in Overlord in Normandy. There's no denying that. Whether you look at the deception plans, transportation plans, their part in supporting the ground forces bombing the beaches. Yeah, there are questions over. Actually, there are questions, but it did something. It's like some are more successful than others.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got this development, etc. And the biggest thing is they really proved Harris wrong. He had the absolute doubt on them. And we got to remember, and this is, I say, I'm on a Canadian channel. These men and women of Bomber Command came from all over the world. That's the other thing that I always remind myself of, and I absolutely love this image. The Lancaster bomber, and it's got everybody that's needed to keep it flying. So it's got,
that's a great one.
Yeah, it's got the refuelers, it's got the crew, it's got the net officer, it's just got absolutely everybody there. And it's, you times that by, you think about the scale, gosh, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. It's just absolutely quite wow. A real, and hopefully, I really do hope that I've put forward a good case that Bomber Command, played a huge part.
Yep.
And a very part.
I'm buying it. So I'm sure people do. So unless you did anything else you wanted to add to the conclusion here? Or?
That's pretty much it, really. Yeah. But it's just really a message of, I think one thing that I find really interesting about studying history, well, 2 things actually, is one, the more you learn, the less you realize you know. You think, you get in there and then it's like, oh god, somebody throws this at you, which is great, and it makes you hungry to know more. You're just like, oh god, I've got to know about this, but the other thing is, and I find especially with this, is just the sheer complexity and the importance of historiography as well, and understanding how things have changed is huge, and getting to the point of where we are now. And I think Bomber Command is a very powerful example of how that narrative has changed, and again what we put in brackets, it is Dan Busters or Dresden. There's a reason for that, and unpacking that and trying to get to grips with that and finding out these sort of stories is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I think you make a point of kind of what I try to do overall, with the historiography, because again, you hear all that it's boring, nobody cares, don't talk about that in books or whatever. And I'm like, well, things like this prove that that's not true. People want to know how we got here, and the historiography is part of that, right? This is why people scoff when they hear, Les Maori or Dresden, right? It's because of historiography. Whether however you want to dress it up, it's still historiography. If it's films, whatever, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's part of this. So I think you're bang on looking this, and I already have my idea for how I want to have you back on.
I will happily come back on. Yeah.
So we will we'll have more of a broader focus next time, I think, but because I got an idea. But we do have some questions if you still have some time, if that's all right.
I've got time, so go for it.
Perfect. And people are sticking around, so
give me a chance to have a drink. My voice is
yeah. Take a second. And again, this is a really it's a very specific question, but a good one. Is there any figures for the daylight mission losses over Normandy?
I can't think off the top of my head, but as I say, for the whole of the Normandy campaign, June, July, it's 0.4%. They were incredibly low. There are daylight raids where there aren't any losses at all.
Which
when you think about it, and it is absolutely incredible. And Harris is really, really nervous about daylight raids, and I will give credit to him. I don't blame him for being nervous, because you look at what happened at the start of the war, you look at attempts in daylight that have happened, even with. So I gave a talk on World War II TV, just to do a little plug there, about a raid on Eindhoven that was in daylight,
right?
And the losses there were horrendous. And they're using, the Mosquitoes get away with it, but the other aircraft really, really don't. And they've got fighter protection for most of it. Yeah, it's a massive, massive turnaround at this point. So the figures do lower, yeah,
but it's hard to. Well, the next question is connected to this in a way. How can no one agree on Bomber Command's losses during Goodwood?
Yeah, it's. I don't know where to come with that, to be honest. The whole thing with losses, I don't know if this is more of a general thing, really, is. It goes with the question, how many losses do you say were lost in the Normandy campaign by Bomber Command? Because technically you'd need to go back to March. Right. But then you go, was that really because they didn't know what they were doing and it wasn't set and it hadn't happened yet? It might have been cancelled, and the same goes, this is a conversation that I think I had with someone about the First World War, is about the casualties, those that died afterwards or died of wounds or many years later because their lungs packed up because of gas and they died 20 years before. There's all these questions. So there is, I'm probably thinking about it a little bit too deeply there, but
no, I don't think so. I think you're right. That's why I just kind of giggle about these things, because I just giggle because when it's hard, I'm just like, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry, almost, in my way of thinking about this stuff, because it's not easy. Like, who sets the definitions, right? That's a fight in and of itself. Who even frames parameters, right? That'll lead to a fight for a career. People will argue about that for 3 decades. So
this is the other thing that people say the figures of the Battle of Britain initially, and I'm going to toot my horn about this. Bomber and Coastal Command were counted in the casualty figures during the war, and then after the war, it's like no, we're not including them as the fighter pilots, which again has got a lot to do with the memory of Bomber Command and such, like and Coastal Command having to get caught up in it. But then you look at the criteria, and it's like one flight within that period, and there's people that should really have been part of the Battle of Britain because they just missed it, or they weren't. And then there's some that flew one mission and they didn't engage the enemy, but they were kind of, that qualify on the 31st of October. And you go, well, do they count? Compared to someone that was flying, so again, there's these arguments and such like.
It's not an easy. I don't think it's an easy question to ever answer, to be honest. And
I can't.
It has nothing to do with the service either, right? Because like you already made the point, right? Of the First World Casualty thing is perfect, right? Because the Commonwealth War Graves Commission counts dead up until 21, whatever it is, whatever the last peace treaty you signed, right? So that's confusing. So adding these different operations, different arms, and like you said, wounds and all of this stuff, it's not easy. And again, I've come across this myself. Trying to define parameters will get you talking to if you're trying to defend a dissertation. Less said about that, the better. But
I've got all that to come. So
I'm still scarred. Another question. I haven't seen this yet because I think it just came out. The new Lancaster film, which I think you did see, right?
I did, yeah.
Phil wants to know if you liked it.
What was it? I think it was about an hour and 40 minutes, hour and 50 minutes. Yeah, it was. I thought it was good. I mean, there was quite a lot of things that I thought, oh, you could have got that in, and you could have got that in.
Yeah, but
It's
that
one of
always
those things. Yeah, I mean, I was like, oh, you didn't mention the Augsburg raid. That's really important because that put Lancaster on the map, and I think there wasn't really a lot about, I don't know, certain rate. I mean, there was a good section, a reasonable section on D-Day. It was good to see Nuremberg mentioned, but again, they're quite sweeping things. So of course I'm there going, you haven't mentioned this. It's like, how can you not? And it's like, no, that's because you're a nerd, James. And so I think if for someone in the general public that had no idea or had seen a Lancaster at an air show and wanted to go, oh, what's that about? Yeah. It's good. Hopefully it kickstarts people to be more interested.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the main thing. And it was very interesting because they had a survivor from Dresden as well on there speaking, which I thought was because I was, again, it's this idea of telling different stories and telling it, which I thought, I gave it a little doff, but it wasn't perfect, but I think it was good for what it was trying to do.
What it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, what it is. Yeah,
we all have that problem, right? We're always like, oh, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, or I would have done this. But it's like, okay.
So I'm terrible with films as well because I just
I know it's hard to shut the brain off sometimes. But I think that's a fair assessment. And we're gonna a couple more here about the U.S. Army Air Forces. Are their losses higher or lower for this time period?
I think they're slightly higher. There's also one other thing that springs to mind with the USAF is there's a little bit more made of the friendly fire because I think it's before Cobra. Again, this is where there's gosh, I don't know, Lieutenant Colonel or someone that's killed, and there's quite a few troops killed because they bombed slightly early. So that's quite a thing made out of, and I haven't really come across, not that I've really looked in it in detail in terms of from the ground, but there is this thing about the Americans being less accurate than the RAF and such, like, and this kind of like, oh, if it's an American plane, you got to take cover. It's British. Oh no, it's fine. I don't personally buy that. I think I can't really see. I can't see it being that much of a difference. I think that might be because of that incident before Cobra or something or such. Like, I don't really buy it, but I've heard that. I don't.
There's also Alex makes an excellent point. Larger crews. One plane goes down, right? That's just math.
Well, that's the other thing that I find quite bonkers is and I'm going to have a nerd now say the exact figures or something, but I believe that the Mosquito as a bomb bay only slightly smaller than the B-17. Of course, it's 2 crews to a Mosquito, and it's like 9 or whatever for a B-17. But again, on top of that, the crew for the Mosquito are more highly trained. It's going to take longer to get them in, etc., etc. So there's all sorts of arguments with that, but
So I think that's it. Phil says, fair assessment, but they seem to miss a lot. I don't know. I can't speak to it. I haven't seen it yet. I can see it soon. We'll see. What else? Oh, and then Darren had an interesting question, but I think it kind of got covered in the sidebar about the law, like, the lower losses, right? That less than 1%. Not, yes, air superiority, but just no night fighters is a big one. No presence of Luftwaffe.
The Luftwaffe are still a pain. They're still there. They're still a presence, but the scale is just astronomical in terms of. So I think in the whole of June, the Luftwaffe managed as many sorties as the Allies make on the 6th of June. Which is one of which is just kind of like sums it up. They're still a nuisance, and I think there are some mines being laid, and there are a few bombs dropped on a few ships and stuff, but it's pinpricks compared to what the Allies are doing.
I mean,
not total air supremacy, but
pretty much. You're pretty close. I mean, it's but that just gets worse, right, for the Luftwaffe as the war goes on. And I've talked about that quite a bit. It was Leslie McNair. Yeah, it's coming back now from Great Dominion.
Thank you.
Thank totally. You. That just sorry, when I do these ones, the American stuff just goes out of my head. And Keller was hurt too. I was wounded as well.
Okay.
They went with him anyway, so it worked out for them. Okay, so there's and then there is one more thing I want to just talk about really, really quickly about Dresden, because I agree with you. That's kind of, I want to talk about this in the future, but this could be the teaser piece. because Kurt Vonnegut writes about Dresden because he's there, right? I think because he was huge, right? He was a massively popular author. Well, still is. His account of that is undeniable in having an impact and how he presents it. And again, you're the expert on the historiography stuff here, but to me, like the Vonnegut thing is what sets a lot of the mindsets for a lot of people, because they'll love his writing and have no idea about anything else about World War II, but they'll be like, Dresden's bad. You know, I think he has a part to play in that. Not bad or good. It's just how he presents Dresden from how he saw, because he was the one that they made clean up. Right. He was one of those POWs who survived and had to deal with the aftermath. Yeah. Maybe we can get into that later, but I just did wanted to jump in there with that.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there is someone who is, I don't really want to mention, who wrote a book on Dresden that had quite a big impact in the 1960s in terms of these absolutely inflated figures and such like, which I think played a part in historiography as well. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but
I do, unfortunately.
I think that's something definitely that's influenced it. I mean, you've had some very, very interesting books afterwards. There's also a veteran, I think he was captured at Arnhem, I might be wrong, who was also a POW in Dresden, whose name absolutely escapes me. Someone's going to know it or Google it very quickly. That I think he spoke. He died not that long ago, actually.
I don't think so.
Again, that's another one that's kind of when it's brought up, which is perfectly fine, and it's an incredible story, and it was absolutely horrific. But again, you do have these various voices that are coming up. Some much more legitimate than others.
Yeah, exactly.
But they all have their influence and such. Like, I think the biggest thing really is that memorandum and the sheer turnabout face of Churchill and this, the immediate post-war. And then let's not forget, it was a Labour government that came in. They didn't, they were there as well, going, no, we're not. The No Campaign Medal. We're not addressing this, and it's just shunned aside. And the one thing, actually, you mentioned the Lancaster documentary. There was one veteran on there that said that he didn't admit to his wife he was a aircraft bomber command for 35 years until it was a reunion, which again I think is a similar thing. And I mean, in fact, this would be a very, very interesting discussion. Is about veterans, because there's a lot that don't speak about it for years and years. It doesn't have to be bomber command; it could be anything, because they want to get on with their life, start a family. It was obviously traumatic, whatever. They don't see themselves as heroes, maybe because they came home. There's all these factors to consider, which again would be another discussion, actually.
That's a whole other thing that I was
but the link definitely with bomber command is there is this sense, even with people that went through it and survived, of I don't know if I can really talk about this.
That's extremely common. But so sorry, one more question, then I do have to run, unfortunately. But
so sorry.
A bit of a lighter one and completely direct opposite of what we're talking about today, because you mentioned it's not your favorite fighter. What is your favorite fighter? From Normandy.
I'm gonna get absolutely. How can you say that? I've got a massive soft spot for the Hawker Hurricane.
Oh, okay.
I think the Battle of Britain,
I expect to say something completely out of the blue. That's not out of the blue.
I've also got a soft spot for the P-51 as well.
Well, yeah, come on.
It looks so cool, isn't it?
It does look very cool.
But the Hurricane, it just what it did, the Hurry bomber, and what it did in the desert and such like, and it just looks sturdy, and I think it's still kind of underappreciated.
I think so in a lot of ways for what it can do. Anyway, I do got to run, so I'm gonna do a quick. No, talk away. Who doesn't? Who doesn't? Alex is right. Okay, just let me do a quick sign off, and then we'll finish up together. So thanks everyone for watching a bit longer, but I seem to have enjoyed it. Everyone enjoyed it by sticking around by the numbers. So thanks everyone. Thanks again to James for coming on. If you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe and leave comments after the fact. It really, really helps help more people find the channel, which helps me grow and continue to do this work, which I really need help with right now to keep this going through the summer, basically. So any help you can give. Also on that front, if you can become a patron, that is hugely helpful. few dollars a month really helps me keep this going, which I really, really need help with as well right now to keep that moving along. Lots of benefits if you do become a patron. So please check that out. Links down below, along to my social media. But more importantly, check out James' other talks. They're really good. He covers a whole wide variety of them. So please do check those out when you get a chance. So thanks again, James. Thanks for coming on. Did you enjoy coming on the channel?
I absolutely loved it, and thank you for people that have chipped in with comments and such like. It's been a really, really energetic conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. Yeah,
it doesn't feel like 2 hours, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks again. We'll have you on for sure. We'll bounce some ideas around, and we'll let everybody know what's going on. So, all right, everyone, thanks. Oh, and real quick, like I already mentioned, I have Mark Zilke on tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, which will be 6:30 p.m. UK time, talking about Operations Tractable and Totalize. So we'll see everybody then. Have a good rest of your day. Bye, everybody.